Hello guys, welcome back to another tutorial. Hit the bell icon button so that you don't miss out any tutorial.
Alright, so chapter 1 is going to be all about HTML and CSS. Now if you have some knowledge of HTML and CSS, or at least know what it is and what it's used for, then that's great. If you have no clue how HTML works or what it is, then it's not going to be impossible for you to learn it through this series. It's actually really easy to learn, so just stick with it and try to follow along, and I'm sure you'll do fine. Alright, so what is HTML? It stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's really important to explain the difference between a markup language and a programming language. A markup language is used for the physical markup or the presentation of a website. HTML is not used for logic or programming or if statements, loops, nothing like that. An example of a programming language would be JavaScript, which is a client-side programming language, PHP, Ruby on Rails, or Ruby in general, are all programming languages. HTML, XML, XHTML are all markup languages. And these markup languages work with sets of tags, which are very easy to understand. And here we have a set of tags. We have an opening H1 tag and a closing H1 tag. And what this is a heading tag. In HTML we have H1 all the way through H6. H1 being the biggest, the largest format, and the H6 being the smallest. So if we put in between here, this is a heading, it's going to display in our browser with the H1 formatting, which is the largest font, the largest heading font. And each browser has its own set of default values for how big an H1 tag is. But you can use CSS to change it to however you want. You can have an H1 tag be the same size as a paragraph tag if you wanted to. So that's all dynamic. You can change that. Whoops. So tags usually have an opening and closing tag, much like the H1 here. But then we have tags that don't need to be fully closed. We don't need to have a second instance of the tag name or the element name. And the image tag is a good example. You can see the image tag just has the opening bracket or less than sign, and then the image text of the tag, and then we have the slash, and then the closing greater than sign. So that's acceptable. And there's a few others, line breaks, horizontal rules, there's a few others, and we'll go over that. We'll go over what the difference is when it comes to that. So, and this format is mostly used in XHTML, which is just a more strict version of HTML, and we'll go over that as well. So here's a little bit of history, kind of boring, but it's good to know. HTML 2.0 was published in November of 1995, and that was as the IETF RFC 1866. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but it wasn't recommended from the W3C until 1997 when HTML 3.2 was published. And then in December 1997, HTML 4.0 was published, and then in 1999, HTML 4.01 was published. And in the 2000s, we had some other markup language released, like XHTML, which is basically a more strict version of HTML, XML, which is different in that it's made to work with data and not so much browser presentation. And then we also have DHTML, which I don't have too much experience with, but it's something like a XHTML, just different standards. HTML5 was a candidate recommendation of the W3C in December of 2012, so this is very recent. HTML5 is fairly new, and it is becoming more popular as all the browsers are now they now support HTML5, because there was a couple years where different browsers only did certain functions that HTML5 offers. But nowadays, in 2013, using HTML5 is absolutely fine. Now here's the document structure of a very simple, I guess the most simple HTML document that you can create. So like I said, we have the tag structure. We always need the opening HTML tag, and then we have the opening head tag, and in the head section, this is the closing head tag. In this section is where we put our page title. This is where we can put our site keywords, links to CSS and JavaScript files. This is stuff that won't show on the browser. It won't show in the browser window. The page title will show up at the top of a browser in the little box area, or on a tab. If you open a tab and you visit the website, the title will be in that tab. The body, however, is where all the content for the website is placed. And you can see in my body tags, all I have is an H1 heading, and then I have a paragraph. So that's all that's going to display on the web page. Alright, so here's some examples of some common tags. Like I said, we have the headings tag H1 through H6. Paragraph is just formatting a paragraph. An image, we can insert an image. We'll need to add some attributes to point to the image, but we'll go over that very soon, because each tag can have different attributes. A line break, what this does is just puts a space in, and you can add them. You can have as many as you want. You can add 3 line breaks, which will make a larger space below that element. Unordered lists and ordered lists. The only difference here is that the ordered lists have a number in front of each item, and unordered list just has a bullet or a dot. List tags, these go inside of the lists, and you can have each line will be a list. And I'll be displaying all this to you in this chapter. It's a little hard to tell you, and it's a lot easier to just show you. So we also have a bunch of new HTML5 tags, and this is only a few of them. We have a header tags where we can put all our header content, maybe our logo or a slogan, stuff like that. And we also have a footer tag where we can put our footer menus and SSL seals and stuff like that. The sidebar, the A-side tag is basically used for sub-content in a sidebar. Navigation, usually you'd have a unordered list in this area, which would be your navigation menu for your site. And I don't like to use these tags more than once, even if I have more than one menu. Section, basically just a section of text, maybe a news article or a blog post, something like that. Okay, so let's see. Now we'll talk a little bit about implementing CSS, and like I said, you can link to external style sheets in the head area of your website, and you can also add style, inline style. So let me just go back to our structure layout. So we can do this. We can open a style tag, and then in between here we can put all our CSS. I'm not going to put it there because I haven't taught you CSS yet, but you can do this, and you can also, let me just get back to where I was, you can also just include a link to a style sheet. So we have the link tag, and then the rel attribute, which would be style sheet. The href attribute, which is a link attribute, would point to the CSS file. So in this case, it's pointing to style.css. And then we just have the type, which is text/CSS. So then we could add all our CSS in this file here. You also can use inline style right in the tag you're using, or the element. So say we have a paragraph, we can add a style attribute, and that will allow us to put CSS values in. So you can see here we have color red, and the values, they're separated by label, I guess you could call it, and then a value. So color red, and then we have other kinds of let's see, we can do like padding, which is the space around an element. We could say 5 pixels, and that would give a padding around the paragraph of 5 pixels. And like I said, it's a lot easier to show you, so we'll be doing that in this chapter. So creating an external style sheet, like I said, right here where we're pointing to style.css, this is something you would see in a external style sheet. So we have the body element, and we can display that, we can add styling to that, and the body surrounds everything. So whatever you put in the body tag, whatever styles, is going to apply to basically the entire area of the website. So the font we can set to Arial, so that will make everything in the body, it'll make all the fonts Arial. The background color, we have a hexadecimal value, which is white, 6 Fs, preceded by a pound sign would be white. If we had 6 zeros, that would be black. But you can also use just the color. We can just say white, and that'll be the same thing. Font size, we're setting the font size to 14 pixels for the entire site. And we don't have to style default elements like a body or a paragraph. We can actually add a class or an ID to an element. So we have a paragraph tag here, an opening paragraph tag, and we have an attribute called class, and this we're equaling to my class. So this paragraph has a class of my class. Now we can style that just like we did here with the body by calling the class. So P, which is the paragraph, dot my class, and we have a background attribute of light gray. So this hexadecimal value is light gray. Okay, so what'll happen here is this paragraph, whatever we have in here, is going to have a background of this color because it's the class. Now we can also use IDs. So we could say paragraph ID equals my ID. And then if we want to style that, we need to do, instead of a dot which represents a class, we need to have a hashtag or a pound sign, and then we would put my ID. So this would do the same thing. This would change this paragraph's background to light gray. So I know it can be a little hard to wrap your head around, but once you get it, it's extremely easy. So CSS3 gives us a bunch of new features. We're not going to go through too many of these in the lessons or in the code that we create, but I'll just go through some of the important popular features. The first is media queries, and media queries are great because they allow us to have fully responsive designs or responsive templates. We can say, for instance, apply this section of CSS to the website only if the browser window or the display screen is, say, 500 pixels. So let's say 100 to 500 pixels. and that would give us certain styling for that size only, and that makes it really easy to develop sites for mobile phones as well. You can have the same site but have it displayed differently on a phone, on a smartphone, than on a desktop computer. So that's what Media Queries does, and we'll get a little into that later on. Rounded corners is something that I like because I used to hate having to use background images to create the rounded corner effect, and you used to have to carefully slice out rounded corners from your image, from your Photoshop PSD or whatever, and then write a bunch of CSS just to have rounded corners on a box. Well, in CSS3 we can use the border radius property, and we can make anything rounded, and we can change the radius to whatever, 5 pixels, 10, 20 pixels. So that's a really handy feature of CSS3. Text effects, basically we can have text shadow and stuff like that. I don't really use it too much. Animations, we can have CSS3 animations. We can move things across the screen. We can basically change the styling property through a period of time. So we could change, let's say, the background color of a box from red to green slowly. We could actually have a certain speed for it to gradually change. So we can have some nice simple CSS3 animation. Colors and gradients, we now don't have to use background images to have gradients. We can actually apply that right through the CSS. We have pseudo classes which allow us to better select certain elements. For instance, if we have a list, an unordered list with five entries, 5 lines, we can target, say, the 3rd line or the 3rd list element and style that by itself and not any of the other list elements. So that's something else that's really cool in CSS3. Alright, so that's it. That was a very brief introduction. Hey guys, so in order to create an HTML CSS website, we need to have some tools, and if you're using Windows or Mac or Ubuntu, then you have some kind of text editor, and any kind of text editor will work. Not a word processor. Microsoft Word is not something, or Abby Word or anything like that that has a lot of formatting, is not sufficient to create web pages. You can, however, use just Notepad. So what I have here is just a fresh installation of Windows 7 Ultimate, and we can just search for Notepad. Oh, it's not typing. And we can use this to create our HTML pages. I'm going to create a folder on my desktop, and I'm going to call it Chapter 1, Section 2. Okay. Now, in that folder, I want to create an HTML file. So I want to go to New Text Document, and we want to call this index.html. Whoop. So we can open this with a browser, and right now all we have installed is Internet Explorer, which I despise. So I'm actually going to show you how to just install Chrome, which is a great browser for developers. So if we just search for Google Chrome, download Chrome. I want to make it my default browser. Alright. Okay, so Chrome is installing. Okay, so now you can see this little icon down here is the Google Chrome icon. I can get out of Internet Explorer, and you can create an account with your Chrome browser if you want. If you already have a Google account, you can use that, which I do. Okay, so we got Chrome installed, we have Notepad, and I'm just going to open up this HTML file with Notepad, and I'm just going to do an H1 tag, and I'm going to write test. Okay, if I save that, now I should be able to open this index.html file with a browser. So I'm going to go to open with. You know what? I'm not sure if they added the text, the .txt on the bottom of this. I mean at the end of it. So let's just try to open it with a browser for now. Chrome. Okay. Alright, now see, by default with Windows 7, if you do what we just did and named a text document index.html, and you look up here, the file is really index.html.txt, so it really has a txt extension, which is why we see these H1 tags. We shouldn't be seeing these. So what we need to do is enable our File Explorer to show file extensions, and we can do that if we right click and go to Properties. I believe we can do that. I'm not exactly sure if this is where we do this. Folder pictures, icons. Maybe up here. Ignore, organize, folder and search options. And under view, let's see. I know it's here somewhere. Show drive letters. Here we go. Hide extensions for known file types. We want to uncheck that. And that should be it. So let's click apply and OK, and now you can see that it has the txt extension, so we want to remove that. Now you can see that even the icon has changed to the Google icon. So let's click on that, and now you can see we have our test heading. And you can see the browser has formatted it to be this. I'm not exactly sure what the font size is, but it's pretty big. So we can actually view the source if we click on. If we press Control U, you can see the source of the HTML page, which has our H1 tags. So that's how you see the actual HTML. You can also go to, I believe it's Tools, and then View Source. We're already there, so yeah. So if we go to Tools and then View Source, it does the same thing. Alright, so we're all set to start creating HTML files, but there's one more thing I want to do. I don't like the standard Notepad text editor because there's basically absolutely no options. There's no coding hints or help or coloring. So what I suggest you use is something called Notepad++, and it's free. I'll put the link in with the program files, and we're going to download the current version. Let's see. Okay, so we want I'm using Windows 7, so I want the Notepad installer, and I'm just going to save that to my downloads directory. and open when done. And Notepad++ is just a more full-featured text editor. Okay, so let's install this real quick. That's good. The default selections should be fine. Let's see, I'm going to create a shortcut. Plugins. I'm going to leave these blank. Alright, so now we can run Notepad. And you can see we have a lot more options, encoding, view options, a lot of different views. We can collapse certain blocks of code, all kinds of things if you want to mess around and look at some of the options. But if I close this, and we can go to our index.html, and we can actually, when you use Notepad++, it puts this link right into this box, this menu, if you right click. So we can just click open in Notepad++, and here's our text file. We can say add a paragraph. Now I can just save that and go back to my index.html file and reload, and now we have a paragraph. So our environment is all set up. When we get into future chapters and we start dealing with PHP and server-side development, we'll need to install some more tools like the XAMPP Apache server for Windows and some other stuff. So, but this is good for now. So we're all set to start coding in HTML, and I will see you in the next section. Alright, so now that we have the tools we have to create HTML web pages, now we can actually create one. And what I'm going to do is create a new folder, and I'm going to call it Chapter 1, Section 3. And I just want to create a new HTML file. So I'm going to go to New Text Document, and we want to say index.html. Whoop. So it's asking if we want to change the file extension to HTML, and we do. So just click yes. And if we open this up now, we have absolutely nothing. So I want to add some structure to this. We went over this a little bit in the PowerPoint tutorial. I'm going to open with Notepad++, and we're going to start. Now, before we add our opening HTML tag, we need to create a doc type. And a doc type is just something the browser looks at to tell which markup language and which version you're using. There's XHTML, there's HTML, DHTML, and there's all just different kinds. In this series, we're going to mostly just be using HTML5, which is just a doc type. So I'll show you. We got doc type, and then we want to have a space and then HTML. Now I can show you the difference if we go to, let's just search for XHTML doc type. And this is what we would put if we were going to be using XHTML. You can see that the HTML version is much simpler. So if you want to develop XHTML websites or web pages, then by all means, but I've just been using HTML5 a lot lately. Alright, so we have the doc type. Now this does not count as the opening HTML tag, and sometimes people think that because of this here, this HTML. We need to create that again. So we need to say HTML, and then we want to have a closing tag. Now you can add the tags in a linear fashion if you want, but I like to create the opening tag and then the closing tag down below, as opposed to just going in a linear motion. So the next thing we need is a head tag, and I'm going to close that. And then we need a body tag, and close that up. Now remember, in the head, the content in the head area isn't displayed inside of the browser. There's only a couple things that we would need here, and the main thing is the title. So we want to open up a title tag and close the title tag. And in between that, we can have our title. So we'll say my first HTML page. Not firsty, first HTML page. Now we can add some stuff to the body, and let me just save this and show you. You can see right here, by default, this tab says index.html, which is just the name of the file. But if we reload this, you can see it's changed to my first HTML page. So now let's add some content in the body. The first thing I want to do, we'll just create an h1 tag, and we'll say welcome everyone, and then we can put in a paragraph, and we'll just say this is my very first HTML page. Close the paragraph. Okay, so next I want to show you the different headings. So I'm going to copy this, and we'll say this is a heading, and copy all of the, I'm going to create all the headings. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we can change these. This can be header 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, 6. Alright, so that's all the headings. If I save that and we reload, we'll be able to see that we have our H1, we have our paragraph, and then we have our H1 through H6. You can see the sizing is different, and some browsers will change it just a little bit. So that's why a lot of the times, we'll get into this later, but a lot of the times I use a reset CSS file that will make everything we'll make all the headings into one size, and then as we develop the site, we can add extra CSS styling to change the size of the headings, as opposed to letting the browser do it. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to put here is a line break. Now a line break doesn't need an opening and closing tag, so we can just do BR like that, and that's just a space. So next I'll show you a link. So a link is used with the A tag, and we need the element called href, which will allow us to put the destination that we want our link to point to. In this case, I'm just going to say page.html. Okay, and just want to close that, and we can say this is a link to a page on our server. And you can tell that it's on our server because we don't have a website. We don't have an http whatever.com. All we have is page HTML, so it's going to check our website for page HTML. Alright, so let's make another line break. And now we can do the same thing, but we can point to an external website. So let's say a href http, I'm sorry, I can't type today, http google.com. We'll say this link goes to Google. Alright, so let's save this and check it out in the browser. So we have, this is a link to a page on our server, and you can see down here when I hover over it, it's going to our site or our folder / page.html, which obviously there's nothing here. We didn't create a page HTML, so there's nothing there. This link will go to Google, so if we click that, it brings us to Google, but it took us away from our site. And good practice is to have it open in a new window if it's going off your site. That way your site is still in the browser, and that's really easy to do. All we need to do is add another attribute to the A tag, and that's called target, and the value we want for this is _ blank, and that just means that it's going to open it in a new window. So if we save this, reload, and we click on this, you can see another window opens. Our site is still here. Okay, so that's good tactic to use to keep people on your site. Alright, so let's go back to our code and let's add a couple line breaks. And what I want to do now is show you how to insert an image. I'm going to put the image in a div tag, and div tags by default don't do anything. They don't format your text or whatever anyway. You actually have to do it through CSS. So in the div tag, I'm going to create an image tag. Alright, so I told you we don't need to end it. We can just do this. Now we do need an attribute. We need a couple attributes. The first one is the source attribute, which is src, and that is going to be equal to the location of the image. Before we do that though, I'm going to show you another attribute which is called alt, and that stands for alternative. And what this is this will be the text that'll display if for some reason the browser doesn't find your image. Alright, so in this one we'll just say sample image, and let's save that and go and reload, and you can see all we have here is some text that says sample image, and that's because the browser can't find the image because we didn't put anything in the source. So what I'm going to do now is go back to our folder, and I'm going to add an image to it. Let me just drag this over here. So let's just look at this. So basically I just have this sample image of it looks like a ball with a colorful background, or a pinwheel or something, but we're going to use this image, and if you see this, the name of it is simpleimage.jpg, and you can see that it's right in the same folder. In the next section we'll create an images folder and we'll put it in there, and then we'll have to point to that. But in this case, it's right in the same folder, so all we have to do is type the name of the image, which is simpleimage.jpg. Save that, and now if we reload, now we see the image. So that's it for creating our markup. In the next section, I want to take this same page and I want to add some styling to it through CSS. So I'll see you in the next section. Alright, so we created a very simple HTML page. If we go to our folder and we visit the page in the browser, we can see we just have some headings, paragraph, links, and an image. What I want to do now is add some styling, because up until this point we have no styling whatsoever. And I'm going to create a new folder called C1S4, And I'm actually going to copy both of these and paste them in that folder. Okay, I'll close that. I'll open the new one. Okay. Alright, so I want to show you a couple different things. I'm going to open up the index HTML with Notepad++, and there's a couple different ways we can add styling. The first way I'm going to show you is not recommended. It's known as bad practice now. It was used back in the 90s or maybe the early 2000s, and that was inline styling using HTML. And let me show you an example of that. For the body, let's say we want to change the background color to the body. What we could do is we could give it an attribute called BG color. And this is an attribute. This isn't a CSS style. So we can say red. Alright, so if we save that and reload, we do have a red background, but this is inline. We don't want this. We want to keep our markup clear and just for presentation, not for styling. That's what CSS is for. And what we could do is we could do some CSS styling and have that inline as well. And we do that with the style attribute. So we can say style, and we can say background color, we'll say blue. Reload, and now the color's blue. So this is better than what we just did because we are using CSS, but again, this is inline and it just doesn't look very clean. So another thing I'm going to show you is how we can just add the style itself into our head area. So we can create a style tag and close that tag off, and we can take this background color blue, copy that or cut it and get rid of the style attribute, leaving our body tag untouched and nice and clean, and we can add that right here. But we actually need to specify what we want to add this color to, or background color to, and it's the body. So we can say body and paste that right in there, and I'll change the color just so you can see. We'll say green. Okay, so let's reload, and now the background's green. So this is better than the way that I just showed you in the body tag. Now this still isn't the very best way to do this. The recommended way to do this is to just include a style sheet and then put the styles in there. And the way we do that is we use the link tag with the rel attribute that's equal to style sheet, and we want href, which is going to equal, it's going to equal our style sheet. So I'll say style.css, and then finally we want a type attribute that goes to text/CSS, and then we can just close that off with a forward slash and a greater than sign. All right, so let's actually just get this here. We don't want the tags, the style tags. We just want that. Get rid of the style tags. And doesn't that look a whole lot cleaner just having this one inclusion of the style sheet? So if we save that and we reload, it's going to go back to white because we have no styling yet. We don't even have the sheet. Now we want it to be called style.css. Now we could put it here. Actually, I will put it here for now. We want a new document called style.css, and we can open that with Notepad++, and we can paste in our body code, our body styling, and let's change it back to red. Okay, so if we save that now the body's red because we're in the style.css file, which is included in our HTML file right here. Alright, now this is the best way to do this, but I usually would suggest not to have all of these in the same folder. I usually create a CSS folder and an images folder. So let's do that. CSS and images. So now we can move the style.css into the CSS folder, the sample image into the images folder. Now if we go back and reload, we're going to have some problems. First of all, our styling is gone. Second, the image is not showing. And the reason for that is that we move the files. So if we need to go back to our index page. Okay, so we'll go back to our index page. Now here it's saying to point to style.css in the same directory, but we moved it. So we want to say CSS folder, whoops, and then a /. Now it says that it's in the folder CSS. Same thing down here. Instead of just having src equals sample image, we want to put images because that's where it is now. So if you save that and reload, and we have everything back. And I'm just gonna get that background color. We'll just now with the background color property, we can just type the color. But if we want to be more specific, we can type in hexadecimal values, which start with a hashtag. For instance, this value here is for light gray, so I can save that. And now we have a light gray background. So what I want to do now is add some CSS. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is we'll keep the background color gray of the body. Alright, now we want to choose a font. So we need to say font family, and I want an Arial font. By default, I believe it used the Times Newman, or the New Time font. But if we save this, we should see when we reload, our font's changed to Arial, and this is the body, so it's pertaining to every single thing in this body, in between the body tags. So, and the next thing I want to do is add a font size. Font size of 14 pixels. What is going on here? Okay, so font size is 14 pixels, and this will not pertain to the headings or anything here for that matter. If we don't have a paragraph or a heading or whatever, the font size will be 14. Alright, so the next thing I want to do is show you I could take, let's say, the H1 tag. Sorry, I keep clicking out of the virtual machine. We can do H1, and we can change the color to red. If we save that, you can see both of our H1 tags are now red. Now, what if we don't want this? What if we only want this tag, this H1 to be red? Then we have to use either an ID or a class. And in this case, we should use a class. So if we go to our welcome everyone H1, we're going to say H1 class. We're going to add the class attribute equals, and we'll say red. Or actually we'll say red class. So if we do that, reload, nothing changes. What we need to do is go to our style sheet, and we don't want all the H1s red. We just want the ones that have red class. So we need to do H1 dot red class, and then this will only pertain to H1 tags that have the red class. So if I reload, now this is back to black, and the main heading is red. Now I'd like to add a container, or sometimes called a wrap, and that's just basically the outer edge of the website. This particular page is just sitting on the left hand side of the browser. What I want to do is put it in the middle and give it a width. So to do that, we need to add a div, and the div is going to go after the body but before everything else, and this is going to be an ID. Now the difference between an ID and a class varies for some people, but what it is supposed to be is a class you can use more than once, or you should be able to use more than once. Like this class here, this red class, I should be able to use this on any H1 tag, so I'll have multiple red classes. An ID will pertain to only one element, so this is going to be the container element, and I'm not going to use the ID of container anywhere else. It's just going to be for this div tag, and that's going to end down here because it's going to actually wrap around everything. So I'm going to save that, and there'll be no difference yet because we haven't styled the container div. I'm going to do that now, and since it's an ID, we need to use a hashtag container. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is give it a width, and I'm going to give it a width of 460 pixels, which is quite small, quite thin for a website. Most sites are around 960, but we don't have much content, so I'm going to make it a little skinnier. And we can save that, and we shouldn't really see anything. Yeah, nothing really happened. If we use our web developer tools in Chrome, you can press F12, and if we click on the elements area, we can actually click this magnifying glass and inspect each of these. We'll inspect this here, you can see it's H1 with the class of red class, and then we can actually see the CSS on this side. So if we click on the paragraph, we have a paragraph. This is actually styling that the browser has put on the paragraph tag. We didn't add this CSS, the browser did. If we click on container, you can see we have a width of 460, and if we hover over it, the blue area is the container. Alright, so it's that wide. Now what I'd like to do is I want the container to be moved into the middle of the page like a normal website. So how we do that is we use margin. I'm going to say margin auto, and what that's going to do is make every margin, top, left, right, bottom, all the same, so that the container is in the middle. So if we reload, you can see now the container div is in the middle, and you can see it reaches from the side to side, the right to the left of the blue area. That's the container. And we can, in order to see the edges of the container without having to do this, we can add a border. So we can say border 1 pixel. Now this takes 3 arguments. We want the pixel of the border, the style, which would be solid, dashed, dotted. We're going to use solid, and then finally the color, which I'm going to use a light gray, which is CCC, C 6 times. So if we save that, go back, I'm going to close this developer tools, reload. Now you can see we have a border. Now I don't like how the edges are touching like this, and we can fix that with padding. So let's go and add a padding, and we're going to say 20 pixels, which would be 20 pixels on every side. A padding is just the space from the edge to the inner part of the div. So if I reload, sorry, I didn't save that. Oh, I forgot a semicolon. So if I save that and reload, you can see now we have a padding of 20 pixels, which is from here to here. Same thing with the top. Alright, so we're getting there. next, you can see we have these straight corners, these sharp corners. I want to round those out. And like I said in an earlier section, we used to have to use background images to do that. But now we can use CSS3. We can use the border radius property, and we can add the radius, which will say 10 pixels. Now if we reload, now you can see we have a little roundness to it. I also don't like the text being lined this way, especially with how these headings are. I want them to be centered. So let's give this a text align property of center. And if we reload, now everything's in the center. Alright. Now you can see we have a bit of too much padding up here on the top, but we do have 20 pixels on the right, left, and bottom, which look good. But the top looks like there's too much because the heading also has top padding. So we can actually take this padding and we can say 0, 20 pixels, 20 pixels, 20 pixels. Now what this is that we're giving padding values to the top. The top comes first, top, right, bottom, left. So just remember that order, top, right, bottom, left. So if we save this and reload, now you can see the top shrunk. It has no padding, but the H1 tag does. Because if I open my tools and we inspect this element, the H1, you can see where the orange is its padding. And we can see that, I'm sorry, it's not padding, it's margin, which is very similar. So it has this margin before, which is 0.67 EMs. So it has its own spacing at the top, so that's why we don't need the padding at the top for the container. Okay, now we can change the background of this inner container. If you remember, the body is light gray, so we can make the container. And here's another trick. You can see up here we have background color. We can actually just use background and do the same thing. If we save that, now it has a white background. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is I want to give this image a border. So how we do this is we only have one image in this page, so we don't need to add a class or an ID to grab this element, this image. So all we need to do is just do img, which is just any image that's on the page. And what I want to do is add some padding. First I'll add a border. So we say border, we'll give it a dark gray border, which will be 1 pixel, which will be solid. Save that, and if you look closely at the image, you can see now it has a border. Now I want to add just a little padding to bring the image away from the border. So let's do that. We'll say padding 4 pixels. And remember, if you only have one value for padding, that means it pertains to every side. So if we reload, now you can see we have this nice border and some padding. So it's starting to look good. Obviously this isn't a won't be a working web page that will be of any use. It's just for example. So that's basically it for applying simple CSS. We'll be getting into, let's see, what will we be doing next? Next we'll be getting into tables, HTML tables and lists. Alright guys, so we created an HTML page and we implemented some CSS in an external style sheet. We dealt with different tags and different attributes and styling. So what I want to go through in this section is tables and lists. So I'm going to actually use the shell of this template of this page to build our tables and lists. So I'm going to create a new folder, which will be chapter 1, section 5. Yeah, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what I'm going to do is just copy what we have from the last section and let's see, get rid of that. I'm going to open this with Notepad++, and I'm also going to open the CSS file. And if we open up this HTML page, and I want to go in and I want to get rid of a lot of this stuff. We want the container because we want this area with the border and such, but we can get rid of all these headings, the links, and the image. So we should just have, in between the body tags, we should just have the container div. So if we save that, now you can see we have the div, we just have nothing in it. And we can even give it a minimum height. So actually, let me get rid of this H1, get rid of this image styling, and for the container we can say min height. We could give it a hard-coded height as well, but it won't grow as you add content. If we do a min height, it will grow as we add content to it. So I'll say 400 pixels, and now it's 400 pixels, but it will extend if our content extends. So I'm going to go to my HTML, and I want to pull up a page. The W3C website, or W3 Schools, is just an awesome website to learn pretty much everything. And this here will give you some examples of HTML tables. It's basically, tables are basically like how an Excel spreadsheet works. We have table headings, and then we have columns and rows. Alright, and here's the syntax. We have a table tag, opening tag. This particular one has a border attribute of 1, which is just a border of 1 pixel. And then we have rows, which are labeled with TR, and you can see the closing row is here. And in between the rows we can have columns, which are the TD tags. Alright, so let's go and create a table. And I'm just going to create a simple table that has some baseball teams and their wins and their losses and ties. So what I want to do is say table, and I can end the table. Now one thing that should be mentioned is that back in the day, in the 90s and early 2000s, people, or even today, even sometimes today, people use tables to create website layouts. So let's say they had a site that with a main column in the middle and then 2 sidebars on the side. They would use a table and put 3 columns and then put all of the website content in that table. That is very, very bad practice nowadays. Now you want to use CSS, you want to use div tags to create columns and rows. Tables are still great sometimes if you have tabular data that belongs in a table, such as a scoreboard like we're going to do here. So I just wanted to get that out there because it's just very important for new developers to understand. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create a row of headings. So we do that with tr, which is table row, and then we're going to do th for table heading. And the first heading we want is baseball team. And we're going to have a few columns. We're going to have game wins. Game losses. And game ties. Okay, so we have a row with 4 heading columns. TH is for headings, and the next thing we're going to do is create some data. And we do the same thing. We have table rows. Instead of TH though, we want to use TD because these are just standard columns, not headings. So the first thing we want is a baseball team. We'll say Boston Red Sox, and that will be TD. And next we want the wins of the Red Sox, so we'll say TD. We'll say 30 wins, and losses, TD. Red Sox are awesome, so they have no losses. If you don't know, I'm from Boston, so I'm going to give them some good stats. And we have no ties. Undefeated. So we can copy this. Actually, we can look at this. We save it. You can see we have our headings, which are in bold, and then we have the stats for the Red Sox. So now we can create another one. Let's actually create 4 teams. Let's say New York Yankees have 0 wins and 30 losses. So we'll give them 29 losses and a tie. Okay, so let's see who else we got. Let's say Chicago Cubs have 15 wins, 13 losses, and 2 ties. And we'll say New York Mets can have 15 wins, 15 losses. Alright, so if we go look at our table, you can see we have a nice table with tabular data, not website format, because that's not what tables are for. And let's just put a heading. We'll say H1 baseball stats. And that didn't show up for some reason. Alright. Now we can give the table a border as well, like the one I showed you on the W3 Schools site. Say border equals 1. And that looks really ugly, but you can have a border like that if you want. You can also style tables with CSS. So let's actually do some of that. So we want to style let's style the rows. So if we go to our CSS file, I'm sorry, I didn't even show you guys that I gave the headings and the columns a width of 100, and I aligned the text to the center. So if I didn't do that, this is what it would look like. Okay, they're still aligned to the center, but there's no width, there's no padding. So if we do that, it just makes it a little better. So if we want, we can put a border, let's say TR, and we'll say border bottom 1 pixels, light gray, and dashed. I'm sorry, we got to do that to the columns, TD. Okay, so you see we have a nice little border. We can add some padding. we'll give it 3 pixels padding up and down and 0 left and right. Okay, so that looks a little better. Now that's it for tables. That's the gist of it. We can also make some lists, HTML unordered lists. So let's do that. Go back to the index HTML, and after table I want to do a couple line breaks, and we'll put another heading. We'll say league stats H1, and now we're going to do an unordered. Actually, we're going to do an ordered list, which will give us the numbers. So we want to do an OL tag, and in between there we want list tags. So we'll say Boston Red Sox. Okay, who else did we have up here? Yankees, Cubs. So next will be the New York Mets. Whoop. Then the Chicago Cubs. And last place, New York Yankees. Alright, oops, spelled Yankees wrong. Okay, so if we go and look at that, we have league stats, and we have the 1 through 4 on the side. So unordered lists work the same way. Let's put some break tags here. And we'll do an unordered list, which is UL. And we still have the LI tags. And actually, let's put a heading right above it, and we'll say other sports. So we'll say hockey, football, and soccer. Whoop. Alright, save those, and if we reload here, you can see the only difference here is that we have bullets instead of numbers. Now, we have the entire container lined up text align center. So if we don't want it formatted like this, we can change this. If we go to our CSS and we want our LI tags, we want to say text align left. That looks better. Alright, so that's it for tables and lists. You can see we have a nice little statistic page here. Next we will be getting into, let me just check real quick. Next we'll be getting into HTML forms. Form elements. We'll look at some of the new HTML5 elements. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next section. Alright, so next we have HTML forms, and when you build an HTML form, it really doesn't do anything until you add some logic to it using PHP, JavaScript, Ruby, some kind of programming language that can process a form or process post variables. So right now, all we're really going to do is build the actual HTML form. Later on in the series, when we get into the PHP and other stuff, we'll talk about processing them. Alright, so I'm going to create a new folder for this section called Chapter 1, Section 6. And I'm actually going to copy the files from the last, just because I like to use that template. We can open up index, and I can get rid of everything in between the container divs. And this will give us a clean slate. For the style, we can keep this. We can get rid of all this table stuff, and I also want to get rid of the text align center for the container. Okay. Wait, where'd that go? Alright, we can change this heading too. Let's change this to HTML forms. Alright, so like anything else in HTML, forms have their own set of tags. So we're going to open up a form tag, and usually you would give a couple attributes here, and one would be action, and that means that when we submit a form, we submit an HTTP request, and that's usually through GET or POST, and I'm going to explain this a little more later down the line, but for now we're just going to say POST. We're not really sending any data, so it doesn't matter, but just for an example. And then we're going to want a action is where you want to send the form to. Method is going to be POST or GET. It's the method of HTTP request. Action, however, is the script or the file where you want to send the form, so we'll just say process.php, which doesn't really exist, but that would be an example of where you would send a form to a PHP script. And then let's close the form tags. Alright, now in between these form tags we can add all our fields, and there's many ways you can do this. You could use a table if you want. You could just have the text, paragraphs, but I'm going to use an unordered list for our form. So we're going to say UL and have some list tags, and in each list tag we want to have the label of the field. So we'll say label, say first name, label, and we can actually format this a little better, easier to read, put them on different lines and indent them. So we have a label, we can actually put a colon right here, and then we have the input, and this is going to be just a text box input. So you want input, and usually you'd give it a name so that you could use it on the server-side programming, and it would be something like this. And we want to type. So the type is text, and then you can close it like that. So if we save this, we now have a label and an input in our form. I don't want the bullets here, so I'm going to go into my CSS file, and we're not going to need any of these. We can keep the list here. We don't need the table stuff. And for the list element, I want to get rid of that bullet, so I'm going to say list style none. Okay, so that got rid of that. Let's actually put a heading. we'll call this registration form. Okay, so what we want to do now is add another field. So I'm going to put a line break here, and we can actually copy this. We'll say last name, and if we were going to process this form, you'd want to make this last name as well, and that's also text. What else can we do? We can have email. Now with HTML5 we have a whole bunch of new input types, and email is actually one of them. So we can change this to email, and what that does, it'll actually validate the field and make sure it's an email field, email value, without using any kind of JavaScript or anything like that. So that's really cool. And then the last thing we'll have is a message area. Oh, let me change this name. And for message, we're going to use a text area. So that's not an input tag. Text area has its own tag, and you want to give that a name. And hold on, keyboard's acting up. And we can actually have a ending text area tag. Okay, so if we save this, okay, the form looks a little demented, but we'll fix that. We also need a submit button. So here we'll add input type equals submit, and the value will be what's written on the button. So we'll say register. Okay, so we can see that this is a little messed up here. What I'm going to do is add some styling to the labels. I'm going to give them a fixed width, okay, so that the boxes aren't ending at different or beginning at different positions here. So if we go here and we type in label, and what we want to do is say display inline block, and we want to give it a width, we'll say, of 150 pixels. Okay, now I'm going to get rid of this text align center. It's just making things look a little ugly. There we go, much better. So we'll give a little space above the register button. Alright, so that's a form. Now if we submit it, it's not going to do anything. It's going to process.php, but we obviously don't have that file, and even if we did, we're not on a web server, so it's not going to work. PHP needs a web server to run. Now I'll actually add a couple more elements, different kinds of input. Let's see, we can add let's say, I don't know, we'll say favorite food, and we'll make this a select box. So we want to say select select name equals food, and then we want to end that select tag, and in between them we want options. So option with a value, value can be pizza, close the option, and this value equals pizza, this isn't going to display to the user. We need to put something here to display, which will just have pizza. If I copy these, we can change the value to I don't know, hamburgers. And we'll say steak. Okay, so we get the select, open tag, options, which you can have as many as you want, and then the closing select tag. You can see now we have this drop down with our values. Okay, so next thing I'll show you is, let's see, we'll do a some radio buttons. So to do that, we do input type equals radio, and we got to give this a name, and let's just say gender, and value will equal male. Now that, once again, that value is not going to display in the browser, so we have to write what we want to display here. Okay, so that's one radio button. I'm going to do a, actually we don't want a line break, we want them next to each other. So we can use NBSP semicolon, which is just a space, and then we'll do the same thing. Grab this and we'll put female. Okay, so if we reload that, whoop, not sure what happened there. Oh, male, female. Oh, I forgot the quote here for radio. And we want to put, we actually don't have a label, and we also didn't do a line break, so we need to do that. We need to have a label, gender, and then we want a line break here. Alright, so we have a different kind of inputs: text, email, select, radio buttons, text area. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you like the video, do give us a thumbs up and share it. Also check out amazing discounts and offers on our premium courses in the description below.